Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled to have with me as my guest Taj Clayton, who's a partner at Kirkland Ellis. Taj, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Richard. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Taj, I wanted to invite you to my program because you have, I think, one of the more unusual backgrounds that I've seen. You didn't come from a family of lawyers, it doesn't look like.
Not at all.
So tell me a little bit about your background and your path to even getting to law school.
Yeah. So my background, I'll start way far back. So my grandparents who are still alive. My grandfather's 91. My
Wow.
grandmother turns 89 in a week.
Wow.
They were sharecroppers in rural Virginia and got married when they were like 15 and 13
Wow.
in an arranged marriage by their sharecropping parents.
Hmm.
And they grew up in extreme poverty in rural Virginia. My parents also grew up in poverty. So they grew up in the projects on the East Coast. My mother was born in Wilmington, Delaware, and moved to my hometown of Pottstown, Pennsylvania. My dad was born in Baltimore and moved to Pottstown, Pennsylvania. My mother was one of 15 kids and grew up in an apartment that not only had no running water, no electricity, but had broken windows. And so in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people who grew up under those circumstances would have rent parties where they'd throw a party, people pay $1, and it would help them pay the rent. My mother and her siblings would throw parties just to get heat in their apartment.
Wow.
Um, and so all of that kind of informed my childhood. I grew up in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. My parents were warm, loving, and very smart, but they were not educated. And they were blue collar workers in a blue collar town. And they worked in a glass factory by and large.
Hmm.
And there were times when they were laid off from that glass factory and we had to do without. And
Hmm.
so I knew, even though I love my hometown, um, it was a small town outside of Philly with inner city problems, whether it's drugs, teenage pregnancies, violence, etc. I knew I was destined to do something more. And
Hmm.
I saw my parents' work ethic, and I knew if I applied that with my brain, I could have a better outcome. And so my
Hmm.
older sister was the first in our family to go to college. She
Hmm.
went to Penn State. She's 5.5, 6 years older than I am. And then I was second in our family to go to college. I always wanted to go Ivy League.
Hmm.
And so I got into Harvard. And that admission to Harvard 100% changed the trajectory of my life and those in my circumference.
Hmm. What is it that you think about your either yourself or maybe your upbringing that kind of really inspired you to want to pursue, a life of, an academic success or, being a student? I mean, it's obviously not around you. I mean, what kind of gave that to you, do you
Yeah.
think?
So I attribute to a couple of things. First and foremost, my parents. So my parents were very hardworking.
Hmm.
We used to live right outside the projects, not in the projects, but right next to it.
Hmm.
Um, and my dad did not want us growing up there. So they were doing backbreaking work in a factory, lifting heavy boxes and stacking them on a conveyor belt.
Hmm.
He worked doubles, so 16-hour days every day for 10 months straight, just so that he could sock away enough money to move us away from that environment
Hmm.
um, into a standalone house.
Hmm.
My mother used to swing shifts. And so one week she'd work the shift from 4 to midnight, then midnight to 8, and then the following week, 8 to 4,
Wow.
which wreaked havoc on her sleep schedule, et cetera. So, like, I grew up with that work ethic in mind.
Hmm.
Um, but then also, I was like a reader as a kid. So I would read a bunch of biographies,
Hmm.
and I would read about successful people and kind of see what it took for them to get from A to B. And I
Hmm.
always kind of like view my life through my own internal biography. Like, how can I emerge from these circumstances to where I want to be?
Hmm.
And then the third component of it is I had an older sister who was an incredible role model.
Yeah, right.
So she kind of blazed the path for me. But then also my circle of friends um, in my hometown, there were a lot of folks who were, hanging on corners, selling drugs and doing stuff.
Hmm.
My group of friends, we were athletes. And so we weren't perfect kids by any stretch, but we by and large stayed out of major trouble.
Hmm.
And we took our studies seriously. And I
Hmm.
think having that peer group was super helpful for me on my path.
Hmm. What kind of, when you were a kid, before you got into Harvard, what kind of ambitions, did you have in mind, something you wanted to be or what you wanted to do, or?
Yep. So 100%, this is going to be funny. So my biggest career aspiration was I wanted to be an NBA basketball player.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, I would say I've always fashioned myself as an athlete. I was a good athlete. I wasn't like Division I caliber talent, but early on, my hero was Dr. J.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just assumed I'd grow to be 6'6", a small forward for the Philadelphia 76ers. So that was my dream. I wound up being 5'8". So those dreams were dashed. Um, but even I always had a backup plan. And I knew if I didn't make it to the NBA, I wanted to live in an urban setting and be a professional.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of informed actually by my grandfather,
Hmm.
who did blue collar work his whole life.
Mm.
He actually lost a finger in a factory accident, so he has
Mm.
a like a third metacarpal only on his ring finger. And
Mm.
he showed it to me when I was about 12. And
Mm.
he said, Taj, my dream for you is not to work with your hands like I've had to and your parents, but to
Mm.
work with your brain.
Mm.
And so that's kind of always what I thought. So basketball player, a professional. At one point, I like tinkered with the idea of being a screenwriter in Hollywood.
Mm.
But those were kind of my aspirations heading into college.
Mm-hmm. What drove your sister? Was similar motivations, or did she have something else? What tell me a little about her, how she
Yeah.
influenced you too as well.
So my sister Dania, it's a good question. She had a pretty good circle of friends too, and she like me is competitive.
Mm.
So I think she had like some academic rivals
Mm.
growing up, and they kind of pushed each other.
Mm.
And it was not the norm, from
Mm.
my understanding, in my hometown, for people to graduate from Pottstown High School and
Mm.
go to college. It happened, but it was far from the norm.
Mm.
And so I think she always wanted to get out of Pottstown and go to college.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I think that drove her. And then when I saw her do it, I knew it could be done.
Mm.
So that was kind of like the benchmark for me.
So now you go into Harvard. I mean, did you feel like, hey, I've done it now? I've actually got one of the best schools in the country, or did you feel like it was just the beginning? I mean, how did you like Harvard? I mean, was it like, a dream come true, or was it a struggle? What was
Harvard
it
was a
like?
dream come true.
Mhm.
So it's funny. So my first dream school was Princeton,
Mm.
because I was watching an old 80s sitcom with my older sister called Mr. Belvedere, and they mentioned Princeton.
Mhm.
And I asked her what Princeton was, and she's like, "Oh, it's a phenomenal Ivy League school.
Mhm.
You should apply one day." And so that was my dream school. So then my sophomore year, my parents moved us to New Jersey because
Mm.
they found a job at a glass factory in New Jersey. And so then I quickly deduced that Princeton was probably too close for comfort. And my parents could just show up on campus unexpectedly. So I applied, got in, but then I discovered Harvard, and Harvard was a godsend. It absolutely felt like I hit the jackpot.
Mm.
It was interesting, like moving from a community in a world where there was a lack and dearth of resources
Mhm.
to going to an environment where there was an absolute wealth of resources
Mhm.
and a vibrancy. And it felt like there was so much promise for me and all of my peers as freshmen setting foot on campus. And I just knew like a whole new world had opened up to me.
Mm.
So I was super excited as a
Mm.
Harvard undergraduate.
Mm.
And I knew that the limitations, whatever limitations were on a lot of people from my hometown, they were lifted off of me, and it was just for me to go get it.
Mhm.
So it was fun. I had a great group of friends. I've never been short on ambition, so I knew I could use Harvard as kind of a force multiplier
Mhm.
in my life. And it was fascinating every day to go and learn from the best scholars and professors
Mhm.
on the planet, but also like the peers, like my classmates were such extraordinary and are such extraordinary individuals with so many different perspectives. And I was challenged and pushed, and I had to question assumptions. And it helped me grow both intellectually and just personally as a human being.
Mhm.
Uh, and I met my wife there, so that was the icing on the cake.
What could be better? So when did law school actually come into the picture into your profession? When did that kind of emerge into the
Yeah, so
picture?
it's interesting. So I got to Harvard. I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, I knew the MBA was out
Mhm.
of the picture by then.
Mhm.
So I still harbored ideas, but maybe I'll be a screenwriter and have a creative outlet for my career. But then when I got to Harvard's campus, there was an upperclassman or two who introduced me to the world of investment banking and management consulting.
Mm-hmm.
And so throughout my 4 years of undergrad, I thought I'd probably go into business.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that's what I did graduating. So I graduated in 1999. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, we moved to New York. I worked at the National Football League
Hmm.
in one of their departments, and she actually worked for the National Basketball Association for David Stern. And so
Hmm.
we got business experience in the sports realm. And then I did do management consulting. So I left the NFL, got a great opportunity in a management consulting firm, then did a startup, and then 9/11 happened.
Oh.
And my wife is a native Texan. And so when 9/11 happened, she by then we were married. She was like, Taj, we've got to get out of New York. I'm
Mm.
going back to business school. Figure out what you're going to do. So, and Tanika is so funny. She was laser focused on Harvard Business School. So she only applied to one business school. She took the GMAT, got in, and was accepted before I'd even taken the LSATs. And so
I
I was deliberating whether I go to business school, law school, or both.
I
I
see.
ultimately decided on law school because when I was at the NFL, I worked with a great group of lawyers who kind of
Mm.
introduced me to the profession and
Mm.
introduced me to the flexibility of the profession. And a couple of things they emphasized were one, at the time, all of the commissioners of the various sports leagues all had their JDs.
Mm.
Then also, many of the CEOs of the major entertainment conglomerates also were lawyers by profession.
Yeah, right.
And then they told me, and I never confirmed it, but there were more Fortune 500 CEOs from Harvard Law School than any other school in the world.
Hmm. And
So ultimately, I still didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I decided on law school because it was a 3 year program versus two.
mm-hmm.
And I've always loved school and enjoyed being a student. So I decided on law school, and I thought with 3 years I could figure it all out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what led me to law school.
Gotcha. Well, then when did you figure out? I mean, how did you end up doing what you're doing now? Which, I mean, did you think about trying to do something in sports law? Because there's a lot of sports agents
Yeah,
who are lawyers. I mean, it seems like that would have been more natural given your NFL background, your interest in sports.
100%. So I got into law school, and I went to one of my mentors who I met as an undergrad who went to Harvard Law School.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him I was thinking about being an agent.
Mm-hmm.
And he dissuaded me. He was like, Taj, you do not want to be a babysitter. Um, I forbid you from thinking about being a sports agent. He said, why don't you just go into work at a law firm, make good money, pay off your loans, and then pick your head up and figure things out from there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the advice that I followed. He had never led me astray before. So I graduated from law school in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for a federal judge in Boston, the chief judge, Mark Wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Had a really good experience with him. And then I went to a big firm down here in Dallas. So by that time, my parents had moved from the Philly area, New Jersey, down to Dallas because my dad got an opportunity at another glass factory. And then my wife is a Texas native, so it just made sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I started working at a law firm and had instant success.
Hmm.
And it felt good. Like I was in a professional environment. I was doing well. I was getting great feedback and really getting promoted at the firm. Um, and so I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Um, and 1 year turned into two, 2 years turned into three. And before I knew it, like I was really good at being a lawyer.
Hmm.
In 2011, I'll say um, I did pursue running for office.
Hmm.
And so I took a little bit of a sabbatical to try to become a US congressman.
Hmm.
Um, I lost. And so then I went back to my firm and became a partner. And I've been doing it ever since.
Hmm. Now, what kind of law do you practice now?
So I'm a complex commercial litigator.
Okay, gotcha. And did you know you wanted to go in litigation, or I mean, why not transactional? I mean, what made
Yeah.
you decide to become a litigator?
So the summer after my 1 hour year,
Hmm.
I wanted to get exposure to both corporate transactional work
Yeah,
and litigation.
yeah.
And the litigation side just resonated with me more.
Hmm.
And I tie it back to my experience as an athlete growing up. Like
Mm-hmm.
I love to compete. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the few things I like more than competing is winning. And litigation is it's one area where you compete
Yeah.
every single
Yeah.
day of your
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
And so that resonated with me. And then also, I think even though corporate work is super interesting to me,
Yeah.
I think the skills involved with being a litigator map well onto what my strengths and attributes are. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, one of my academic superpowers, if you will, is my writing. So as a
Mm,
litigator, particularly as a junior lawyer, like writing is what I did a lot of
mm,
and the
mm,
research piece of it.
mm,
And then I also like the performance aspects of being a litigator, like
mm,
getting up in court and being able to present to a judge or a jury and get the adrenaline pumping. It's
mhm.
fun. And then also, there's still the screenwriter in me. There are creative aspects to being a litigator.
It's true.
Thinking strategically about how do you get a witness adverse to you to say what you need them to say.
Hmm.
How do you write a brief that moves the judge's eyes down the page and is interesting and different from the other briefs they're reading?
Hmm.
So all of that appealed to me. It was just like a perfect mix for
Hmm.
me as a litigator.
So now that you've had this successful career as a litigator, have you ever thought that maybe you'll still become a sports agent? It's not too late. You're very young in your career. Ever think about that?
No. I do. I've had some sports clients, and I stay close to the sports world in a couple of ways. And one of my mentors is a co-owner of the Celtics. So that kind of stuff is fun. But now my aspirations have changed, where at some point I want to be an owner of a team. That's something
Oh,
that my
interesting.
wife and I share. And so it's
Huh.
interesting. When she was at the NBA, um, she had a phenomenal experience at the NBA.
Huh.
And so she told her mentor at the NBA, like, it's fine working, but I want to be an owner. And his advice to her was like, okay, leave the league, go back to business school, and then make your money elsewhere. So
Nice.
that's the new ambition at some point.
Huh. Interesting. So it seems like when you kind of reflect on your career, I mean, it sounds like you weren't planning on going to law school. You kind of stumbled into it, but it seems
Yeah.
like you found something that really fits your personality and everything really, really well. I mean, is that what you'd say?
Yeah, no, that's 100%. I didn't have like a set plan
Yeah.
ever. I just kind of, I'm a firm believer in you work hard, you put yourself in position, um, you if you're good to people and you're in position, good things tend to happen
Yeah.
by and large. And so that's kind of the path I followed. And I've been very fortunate to have great mentors. Um, I'm still good friends with the folks who recruit me out of law school, even though we're at separate law firms. And they've
Yeah.
been phenomenal to me in my career and guiding me and mentoring me and open up opportunities. So I've been super fortunate. And it just so happens the profession I pick just so happens to fit well with my strengths and my interests.
Mm.
And then part of what I really love about litigation, I have a diverse practice. So I don't specialize in like antitrust or
Mm.
class action work or a particular industry. Um, I like the diversity of my cases, so it
Mm.
keeps my practice fresh.
Mm.
And it always, I liken it almost to college in my undergraduate experience, where I could take a class in anthropology and a class in literature and history and all these various things. And I kind of feel like with each of my cases, um, in so many disparate areas, whether it's healthcare litigation or automotive or sports or entertainment, I'm learning about these various industries and learning more about the world around me. So like there's a real kind of intellectual satisfaction and gratification that I derive from
Mm.
my practice that keeps it fun and fresh.
What do your parents and grandparents think about your career and going to Harvard twice and all that?
They're mind blown, and it's actually interesting to kind of see it through their eyes because I never want to take it for granted, but I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes I do.
Yeah.
Um, so my mother passed away 5 years ago,
Oh.
so she saw the trajectory I was on, and I've definitely like had some phenomenal success in the ensuing 5 years. She didn't see where I am now, but my dad is still alive,
Uh-huh.
my grandparents, and I think if they were to talk to you, they would say they never could have imagined
Yeah.
that I would be where I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Born in 1977 in a economically depressed blue collar town, I think they would have been happy if I would have gotten my high school diploma and had a good job at a factory in my hometown. I
Yeah.
think they considered that success.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My dad told me back in the 80s, he was like, Taj, if you make your age in thousands, you're successful. So so if you're 32 and you make $32,000, that was kind of his benchmark.
Interesting.
And so I talked to him last week on my birthday. He's just blown away,
Huh.
and it's really gratifying for me because I can do things for them now that they never could have imagined.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I took him on a nice vacation to India. We saw the Taj Mahal together. You know, my name is Taj, so like he was over the moon.
Wow. Taj, it's been wonderful and such an inspirational story. When you do become that a professional sports team owner, please come back and tell me about
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you.
it.
Thanks for the opportunity to share my story. I really appreciate it, Richard.
This is Richard Hsu and Taj Clayton. Thanks.
Take care.